nearly 2025, and if you haven't learned JavaScript yet this year, and if you're looking to learn it in the next year, then I have a show that I think is going to be very, very helpful for you. I want to give you a very practical, super duper practical guide about what to learn, how to learn it, and the things you'll need to build along the way to get a solid grasp on JavaScript. I'm not going to go into an hour-long rant about scope and closure and all these super conceptual topics, which are important, but I want to give you the practical guide on what to do and build. You fill in the gaps on your own. There's too much information out there, if I'm being honest with you. There are 100-hour YouTube tutorials that you'll never finish, and also Udemy courses, and people giving out tons of free information. I'm one of them, and it's not helpful. It's too much information. It's information overload. A lot of times what it ends up being is you're passively just watching some video. So listen to this. There's also a video if you're watching on YouTube. By the way, I started a YouTube channel. You can look it up, Brian Jenny Code. If you just look up Brian Jenny, you'll probably see some videos with me in there. I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'm trying my best. Anyway, let's break it down. Let's break it down exactly what you're going to need to do and start with the setup. What are the things you need to have before you even touch a line of code? The tools you're going to need in no specific order. Visual Studio Code. 75% of developers or something like that use VS Code. It's crazy how many people use VS Code nowadays. Use VS Code. I don't care whatever cool new tool is out there. We're going to use what the pros use. VS Code. CodePen. Get a CodePen account. CodePen.io. CodePen.io. Codecademy.com. Also get an account on there. Get GitHub account and also download Git. Get Node and Node version manager. These are the simple tools you're going to need just to start. Here's all the basics you're going to need. Node and Node version manager are ways to run your code. You'll need this a little further down the line, but you're going to want this stuff. If you're using a Windows, by the way, pro tip, get Git Bash. Use Git Bash for your terminal because it's going to make it a lot simpler to follow along with other instructions and directions and videos you see, which probably are Mac-centric and not Windows-centric. And Git Bash allows you to type in commands basically the same way you would like on a Mac as a Windows or whatever other operating system you might be using. Okay, now time for the basics of JavaScript. You've probably heard this stuff or you kind of know what you need to learn, but here's the way I would learn it and here's the way I still tell people to learn it, which is not much different than what I did 11 or 12 years ago. Go to codecademy.com, do the HTML and CSS tracks. Why HTML and CSS? You said, hey, Brian, I thought this was a JavaScript thing. What's the HTML and CSS stuff doing here? You need to learn HTML and CSS before you learn JavaScript. I fooled you there, didn't I, for a minute there? You thought you could just learn JavaScript on its own, but no, my friend, that was your first mistake. You don't want to learn JavaScript in isolation. JavaScript is the language of the web, of the browser. If you go to your web browser, you probably see stuff there, right? Like a UI, you see stuff you want to interact with and touch and poke and press. You go to Airbnb or whatever. There's things to interact with. JavaScript helps facilitate those interactions. You click on a button, it submits a form. That form submits data to a database somewhere. That's likely handled by some JavaScript. You click a button or you filter a list, of apartments that you're looking for by, views in Hawaii or something like that. There's probably some JavaScript taking place there. You go to any site that has any interaction on it. Basically, when you click on something, you type something and the screen adapts or adjusts to that behavior or to your input or something like that, you better believe that JavaScript is at play. So learning JavaScript in isolation isn't super helpful as a beginner because you need something to look at and to really grasp onto. You need a foothold somewhere. So yes, learn some HTML and CSS, not a whole lot. Learn how to make a basic little funny page where you have like a picture and a list of some things and, maybe some text here and some colors here. Learn enough to be dangerous, right? This is something that really can be done, in a week or two. Build something small with HTML and CSS. And if you want bonus points, learn how to do some responsive design. Basically, when the window size shrinks, does stuff look decent? When the window size expands, does stuff look decent? Go to your local newspaper and go to it on a desktop versus your mobile phone and see how it changes. This is called responsive design. Basically, you'll have different style applied as the screen width decreases or expands. Learn this stuff, it'll really help you out. Now into the JavaScript part. Use Codecademy again to learn JavaScript. what you're going to do is go through the basic JavaScript track. By the end of it, you should really have an idea of things like numbers, booleans, objects, arrays, control statements, like if this thing happens, then this thing should happen. So if else statements, functions, basically how do you create a function? How do you invoke a function? How do you have a function with arguments? What are arguments? How many arguments can you pass into a function? Learn about the difference between functions and ES6 functions, arrow functions. These are some things you're going to come across, and if you know how to compose a really small program, which we're going to talk about next, you're in a good spot to move forward. While you're learning about functions, a couple ones that you'll really want to commit to memory or at least have a strong grasp on are map and filter, and you want to at least know how to use reduce. Map and filter are array methods. They're these functions that are really going to help you work with arrays and objects. And learning arrays and objects, honestly, is one of the most important things you can do as a front-end or web-focused developer. Why is that? Because most of the data that's transmitted across the web is in the structure of arrays and objects. So if you know how to work with arrays and objects, basically iterate through them, look over them, you're going to have a pretty strong grasp of how the web works at a really basic level. You're going to know how to control and manipulate the data that you're going to interact with on the web.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode, and I want to let you know that becoming a developer in 2025 is not going to look like becoming a developer in 2024. There is an overload of information, AI tools out there, so much conflicting social media BS that it's hard to understand what you really need to do. If you're interested in working with me and my partner Zubin in a very private, exclusive mentorship program where we teach you not just how to code, but how to reinvent yourself as a career changer and help you make a successful transition from your previous life into tech, we want to talk with you. This program is not easy, it is not short, but it is effective. If you want to schedule a talk directly with me or Zubin, just go to the show notes, parsity.io/inner-circle. Back to the show.
And lastly, asynchronous functions and the fetch API. Asynchronous functions are kind of like the idea of me ordering a pizza, right? If I ordered a pizza, I wouldn't just wait till the pizza got back home to take my kids to the park, right? If I was, an active, effective father, I'd be like, you know what? While that pizza's on its way over here, I'm going to do some other stuff. That pizza shouldn't block me from doing other things, so the pizza won't get here for like an hour. Instead of being blocked by that pizza delivery, I'm going to go do whatever I want to do. And when it comes to my house, I'll eat it. But in between that time, I'll do whatever I want. This is the idea of asynchronous functions in JavaScript. Same idea. It's like where a function may be doing its thing, it's doing some sort of action, and while it's doing that action, it's like, hey, you know what? If you got other stuff, some more code below me that wants to run, hey, have at it, dude. It's all good. Because maybe I'll take a second or two, and users don't want to see the screen load for a second or two. So I just went off into a little tangent on asynchronous functions here, but understand asynchronous functions. Also, practice how to explain these things out loud or write them down and share them with other people. This is a really good way to make sure you actually understand the stuff you should be learning. And you're going to end off by learning about the fetch API, window.fetch. This is a browser method, basically a method that just comes standard with your web browser. So your web browser is basically like the tool, the brain where JavaScript runs. Your browser takes JavaScript code and turns it into something that your browser can read and use. And your browser has little tools that will offer your JavaScript and saying, hey, JavaScript, I know you might not be able to go make a request out to some API out there, basically some data store out there. But I have a little method you can borrow. The browser has all sorts of cool little methods and things, and they're usually attached to what's called the window object. The window object is what it sounds like. It's the big global browser object. It's like, hey, I'm the browser. I have these cool methods you can use, and here, JavaScript, you take them and do whatever the heck you want with them. JavaScript's like, cool, I'll take it. So learn about the fetch API, because we're going to use that later in the project we're going to build. Okay, as you're learning this stuff, this is where your CodePen.io account really comes in handy. You have to build stuff, and you can't just build it in Codecademy or Scrimba. That's honestly one of my biggest beefs with people saying, oh, you can just learn all this in Codecademy or Scrimba. I'm like, no, you can't. Do you realize that most software developers who are paid to write code all day write code around an hour and 42 minutes or something per day? It's a super small amount of time that software developers actually spend coding. I just looked this up, by the way. It's at this interesting site about software, and it aggregates all this data about how long coders tend to code through the week, and it shows like by country. And emerging countries, like countries that are still coming up as far as like software and infrastructure and having people write code for a living, they tend to write code longer than their American and European counterparts, but not by much. And even they're not writing code 8 hours a day or even anywhere near it. I mean, I'm talking about the difference between somebody writing 42 minutes per day and like an hour a day, or a little bit longer than an hour. So by and large, most developers aren't writing code all day long. So you might be thinking, what the hell are you guys doing? Well, what we're doing is trying to figure out what we should be building in the first place. This is, again, one of those reasons why I'm not super nervous about AI just taking jobs away, because if all you do is code all day, then yeah, you'd probably be kind of replaceable. But who tells you what to code? How do you know how to code that thing? How do you talk to all the stakeholders and people like that to understand what it is you're going to build in the first place, or if that makes sense, and how do you release it? So what I'm saying is, using tools like Scrimba and Codecademy are great to learn, but you have to start building outside of it. Once you start building outside of those tools, you realize, oh, there's a lot more to just coding than just writing code. So in CodePen, I want you to start transferring some of the code you've written in Codecademy in their IDE, their integrated developer environment. That's cool, but it doesn't really mimic what you're really going to see in quote unquote real life. And neither does CodePen really, but CodePen is a great scratch pad. And when you're learning JavaScript, this stuff's not going to click. It's just not. You're going to get the training wheels on in Codecademy or Scrimba or whatever, and it's like the training wheels are on. Rip off those training wheels, go to codepen.io, and you're going to learn by button. This is my trademarked learning strategy, learn by button. So what you're going to do in your CodePen is create a cute little button, and that button is going to listen for a click of it. And when you click that button, I want you to make a few things happen. Make whatever the hell you want happen, really. Have the button change color. Have the whole background of the screen change color. Pick a random color from an array and turn the button into that color. Grab some text from an input and change the text of the button. Just go wild here. Just go really weird here. Like, I don't know, type in a word. If the word, matches some sort of pattern, then tell the user you won. And if it doesn't, then tell them you lost. These are just to make sure you have a solid grasp of these things outside of what you wrote, like in your nice little training wheels environment. And then lastly, take all this stuff, take your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript, lift it off CodePen, put it into VS Code, and figure out how to open that up in your browser. Hint, 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 here's how you do it. You'll create an index.html file, you'll create a style.css file, and you'll create an app.js file. By the way, besides the index.html file, these file names can be whatever the hell you want. You could call one ostrich.css. You could call one cats.js. It doesn't matter. Learn how to reference these file paths in your HTML. There's too many tutorials that will tell you how to do this. Basically, your HTML will say, hey, go fetch the CSS from this file, go fetch the JavaScript from this file, and then to open it up, you simply open your file explorer and you click it, and it will open up in your browser of choice, which should be Chrome, by the way. You should be using Chrome, and you should be using Chrome Dev Tools. This is really important too. I'm glossing over all sorts of stuff, by the way. This is like the bare minimum you should do. And if you do want to get really good at JavaScript and you do want to learn and go well beyond the basics and do way more than I can explain to you in 15 or 20 minutes, go to dev30.xyz. I'm having one of the last cohorts for a while, probably start in January. There's still room in there. So if you want to join, it's $49. It's with a group of people. It's with me. It's a Slack group. It's not a course. It's a bunch of people that are actually interacting and talking with each other and building in public and stuff like that. It's really cool. It's really fun. I love doing it. It's one of my favorite programs that we have at Parsity, dev30.xyz. Anyway, you're building this stuff, you're putting it into VS Code, and now you have something that resembles a web page. Probably really ugly, but that's okay. On to the next part. The challenge for you. This challenge is a good litmus test. It's a good test to know, do I actually know enough? Do I know enough? Let me see. So this is called FizzBuzz, but this is a remix to it. FizzBuzz is one of the oldest and most popular programming questions and interviews. I don't think they even ask this in interviews anymore, but it was a really popular question. And I was actually working with some students at Parsity recently that were trying to get into the program to tackle this problem and work on it together. And the way we did it was to do this. I went to ChatGPT and I said, give me an array of objects numbered 1 through 100, where the key is number, the key is the word number, and the value is the actual number. So it'll be an object like number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, whatever. And till you get to 100. And you have ChatGPT do this for you because you don't want to type this all out by yourself. Like, what kind of monster would you be doing that in this day and age? That's exactly what ChatGPT was made for. It's for doing stupid tasks like that you don't want to do on your own. Here's the challenge. I want you to iterate through this array of objects. Print fizz if the number is divisible by 7. Print buzz if the number is divisible by 3. Now print FizzBuzz if the number is divisible by both 7 and 3. Simple, maybe. Super hard, I don't know. But this will give you a really good litmus test, a really good benchmark milestone for you to say, okay, do I kind of get this stuff? Or do I need to maybe go back to the drawing board and maybe work on a few of these things? And you're going to get stuck doing this. It's all expected. If this was easy or simple or straightforward, then everybody would be doing it and we'd have way more coders than we know what to do with. And the reality is, I don't care what people say, there is not a surplus of developers. There is a shortage of good developers. There is a surplus of people who know how to code a little bit. Okay, now we're going to put on our big boy pants and we're going to build something really cool. This is going to involve Git, GitHub, and APIs and stuff like that. So your final project in this JavaScript journey here is to have what's called a GitHub page. So GitHub is this repository, it's this site basically where you can store versions of your code. So you can put up your code when you save it. Like on a computer, you might save and you have a version history where you can look at a Google Doc and say, okay, what version of this doc? Oh, I made a mistake here. Let me go back to this old version. That's what Git and GitHub are for developers, except we made it really, really complicated because instead of just being able to save or something like that, what you have to do is use your terminal and write these commands in order to like save different versions of your work to GitHub. It's like way more complicated in my opinion than it should be, but it's an amazing tool. Everybody uses it. And there's a really cool feature in there where you can actually host a free page that everybody can see. So look up how to make a GitHub page. And here's what you're actually going to make on this page. You're going to make a fake e-commerce store. And you're going to use this particular API. API stands for Application Programming Interface. Basically, it's a URL that returns you JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, or essentially an array full of objects instead of a web page. If you go to google.com, what does it return you? A web page, right? If you go to fakestoreapi.com/products, if you do that actually in your browser right now, if you go to that particular URL, it's not going to return you a web page. It's going to return you a big fat array full of objects. And those objects are going to be products, fake products that are coming from this fake store API, right? Your job is to list out all the products, make it look cool, like make it look nice, make it look presentable with some cool CSS, be able to filter the list. So for example, a user should be able to type in like men or something like that and filter the list by all products that have the word men in the product title. Or maybe filter by price or whatever the hell you want. This is the thing. You need to be a little creative as a developer. No one's going to just hand you all the things to do. You need to be able to have some sort of like thought, opinion about what should you build? What would people find interesting? People aren't just going to hand you the solution and the code and like, I want you to build this exact thing. That is where like something like ChatGPT could take over, or OpenAI's new version of their AI tool, right? Like those are the things that you should be worried about. If you're only like taking orders and just writing code based on somebody's very specific specifications, you're not really a programmer, honestly, at that point. I mean, that's what programmers do. We are the specification. When you have something really specific about how a thing should work, like it needs to go to this API, and then it needs to return this JSON data, and then return a list, and then like you might as well just be writing the code at that point anyway, right? Like if you know all that stuff, then you're basically writing the code. Code is an implementation detail in my mind. It still makes it difficult to do, but once you have an idea of what to do, then the code is again an implementation detail. If you can write the right commands to ChatGPT and you're good enough to know exactly what to ask, it will spit you out something that works kind of all right. But how do you even know what to ask in this case? Try not to use ChatGPT for this. Try not to use a ton of AI tools because you do need to get some of that muscle memory before you decide to offload that piece of your thinking onto an AI tool. You don't want to do that too early, or else you risk going into an interview and they ask you to do something without the use of these tools and you completely freeze up. So I hope that's helpful. This gives you a nice North Star project to get to a very, very, very basic level, by the way, with JavaScript. This is not what I would consider like an advanced level or anything like that. What is advanced level? What is moderate level? What is beginner level? What do these things even mean? I don't even know anymore, to be completely honest with you. All I know is that this will get you a nice, solid base to stand on. And if you want to take this a step further, there are some books I would recommend, and they're all by Kyle Simpson randomly. So Kyle Simpson has the You Don't Know JS series, and I would read Up and Going with JS, and maybe something like the ES6 book with asynchronous functions and things like that. This gives you a good conceptual model to go along with your practical things you're building here. I tend to really focus on the practical, especially at the beginner stages, but eventually you want to get into some of the concepts, like what is happening in the browser? What is happening when I write out a function like this? What is the difference between var or let or const or all this stuff that you just kind of blindly write because it works? It's okay to make things work at first, then you want to understand how do these things work. I hope your new year is fantastic. I can't wait to do more videos in the new year, and I would love to hear more about what you want to hear about, because that's really important. I make this stuff for people that are where I was when I was just starting out, and I know it helps a lot of people, but I'm so far removed from that stage that I don't really know anymore. So I would love for you to tell me the things you'd like to see more of, the things you'd like to see maybe less of, and just stuff that you'd find interesting and people I should interview. Anyway, I hope your year's off to a great start. I can't wait to come back in the new year and come up with a bunch of new cool episodes and guests and things that are cracking off. Should be a fun one. So thank you so much, and I will see you around.